Welcome to Ask an Advisor. We're back.
We're back.
We're back. Wes Moss. I'm Krista DiBiase. And we're talking about investing, retirement, all sorts of great stuff. Today, we're going to get to your questions, which you can submit anytime at clark.com/ask. You can ask a question for Wes.
I've been noticing a lot of the questions are Wes and Krista.
That's very
nice.
Which
is cool.
When people do that. And so please send those questions in. And then today you're going to have a couple of really interesting topics. One is something people ask a lot, like when am I ready to retire? When am I going to be ready to retire? And you actually have like a checklist.
A 10-point checklist.
Yeah, so that's pretty awesome. And then you're also going to talk about transitioning from saving to retirement and what the spending in retirement really looks like.
Yeah, how do you start taking what you've been saving forever? How do you start withdrawing it? It sounds simple, but there's a lot to it.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's get to it.
So we'll start with a checklist. And if you're thinking about retirement, it's almost a little overwhelming of like there's infinite things to think about and do. And I think it's important to consolidate that down so your head's not spinning around such a big situation. I'm going to stop working. When do I start withdrawing cash? I've got to worry about my home, kids? There's just so many things to worry about. So let's consolidate that down into 10 things that we can kind of stop the chaos of all the different questions circling around that. And so here we go. So the first one, be counted up. Second one is map it out. Third is paint a picture of your retirement life. 4 is lock in your income streams. I'll start with those quickly. The first one is when I say count it up, you need to do an inventory of all of your different assets. That is the first step, and some people don't love to look at every different account. There's there's some comfort with head in the sand. But that doesn't really work when it comes to planning out the next 20, 30 years of your life. So it's really you, and if you have a partner, sitting down and counting it up and saying, oh yeah, we have this account over here, and oh honey, don't you have this old 401k over here? So you get an inventory of that. And then with that same inventory would be your real estate, not just your investment accounts, but your real estate and any sort of debt. So that is the first step we've got to do. We've got to be honest with ourselves about what we have and what we don't have, and then our liabilities. Second would be the thought around mapping out a retirement game plan. And this is one that I think just will calm everyone's fears down. And I've done a lot of research lately. I'm always studying happy versus unhappy retirees. One of the things I see in retirement planning is that it's pretty easy to do a retirement plan. And when you get to that stage where you're within a year, it's better to do it 10 years prior or even 20 years prior. But getting to retirement, it's pretty doable to do a plan. And there's great comfort for folks when you're getting into retirement to just get it done. And it doesn't have to be. So the industry will provide, whether it's a website or an online planning calculator or you sitting down with an advisor, a fiduciary that can help you map it out, the plans really work because they take in all the main variables that you need to understand, and then you're spending. So you've got that part of that inventory is, hey, what are we going to spend? And that can be just a round number. It doesn't have to be exact. It could be it needs to be directionally right. And then the plan itself accounts for an assumed rate of growth, an assumed rate of inflation, and puts all of those into a really comfortably clear way to figure out. And I think that reduces a bunch of anxiety. So I think mapping it out is number 2. And again, that can be pretty comprehensive. Your withdrawal strategy, your taxes, but that's all in number 2. Number 3, this is less about the numbers and more about painting a picture of your retirement life. I did this exercise with my dad and my stepmom maybe a year ago, or maybe let's call it a couple of years ago. And I was just visiting Pennsylvania, and on the refrigerator was her retirement roadmap, which I had them do in colored pencils.
Oh, very nice.
And it's a really fun exercise, is to sit down and think of the things that you want to do, all the fun things that you're looking forward to doing, all of your core pursuits, all of your socialization, family, friends, hobbies, core pursuits, I call them. And I almost like to do a map of the United States or the world, and you can point to where you want to go travel. And it's a really fun way to clarify all of the fun things you want to do. I call it just a retirement roadmap, but if you do it in colored pencils, it may end up on the refrigerator wall. That was pretty cool to say. This is my stepmom's. I don't know if my dad put his on the fridge. Number 4, lock in your income streams, meaning that income streams, and again, part of this may be in the planning, but they may not all be turned on, right? So you can have Social Security be turned on at any given point in the future up to the age 70, and you've got to make that decision. What about a pension from somewhere else? Maybe you have some sort of annuity that kicks in, or a potential inherit. I see this a lot. Folks that don't have annuities, but their parents maybe had annuities, and now they've inherited that income stream. So spend some time understanding those income streams, because they're so important in retirement. They're like kind of the lifeblood of spending without you tapping your investment account. So that's number 4 to me, is lock in your income streams. Number 5 is something you can totally control. And if you don't, I've seen this spin out of control. Number 5 is finish big projects, and particularly with housing. And this is super clear when you see somebody who retires. I've seen this. They retire and they say, well, we've got to have a little bit more time. So we're going to renovate the bathroom. Oh, man. Or we're going to renovate the kitchen. And it's not a big project, or we're just going to do the floors. And then it spins out of control. So it's not just a budget thing, which that's a whole nother story that can get out of control. Mm-hmm. But it's a project problem too. It's the floors, and it's the kitchen, the bathrooms. The next thing you know, you plan on spending $50,000, and it's $250,000. Wow! And you've stopped working, so you don't have time to cushion that and say, well, wow, we really overspent here, and maybe I'm going to work another year to kind of pay for that. So get the big things done before you know you're going to stop working. So the 1 to 2 to 3 years prior to your retirement, get those big housing projects done. Number 6 is a plan. Craft a plan to kill the mortgage. It is well documented in our research that retirement levels of happiness go up when your mortgage is either paid off or payoff is within sight. Again, not everybody is fortunate enough to pay off the mortgage before you retire, but have a plan to pay it off in those early years of retirement. Number 7, get your healthcare ducks in a row. There's a huge jump when you go from having your own private insurance prior to age 65 to getting onto Medicare. When you get onto Medicare, you're going to need to get some sort of supplemental program. And when you get your Medicare supplement program, you've got to figure out, well, what doctors stay, what doctors are not in this plan. That will take typically meeting with someone that specializes within that space. Now, you can research it and pick it on your own, but I think it's super important to get with someone, whether it's a referral from your advisor or but find a healthcare advisor and make sure that you've got the right supplemental plan for your state. So I'm just curious about that real quick. A healthcare advisor, do you have to be really careful that it's somebody who's really not trying to sell you on one specific plan? You know, what I see in that industry, and again, this is just in the Southeast, is that the healthcare advisors it's such a small, nobody's making a big fortune. They're not selling annuities. There's no giant commission when it comes to this. Do the healthcare advisors get some money to do this? Yes, they don't do it for free. But they're kind of like, you want someone who's more of a broker who's going to look at many different companies. So you don't want someone repping a company. Options and supplemental options in your state. And again, I think it's a hard industry to be in. It's not like these people are making huge amount of money helping. I think it's not free, but I think it's an important service. Okay. Number 8. This is where you tune up your estate plan. And this can, again, before you retire, it's really important to make sure that even if you have wills, are they up to date? Maybe you did a will and your kids are young and now they're grown-ups. Things change. Beneficiaries change. The amount of assets you have change. So you're going to want to check this off the list of sitting down and making sure your will planning and your trust planning is in line with what you want if something happens to you and your spouse. Again, it's one of these things that'll swirl around in your head and give investment and I'd say financial anxiety until you get it done. And that'll take an estate planning lawyer as well to do that. Number 9, rethink your insurance. So you're going to want to, you don't want to go into retirement without being properly insured. And that, again, it's a different phase of life. When you're in your 30s and you're trying to protect your kids with life insurance, maybe you don't need to do that anymore. Make sure your property and casualty insurance is up to date. Make sure you have some sort of umbrella policy when you're heading into retirement. The last thing you want to do is have some sort of weird liability for somebody that gets hurt at your house. So this is about protection. Insurance really is about protection, and it's something you need to check off the list. And then number 10 on my list to check off is the digital side. So do a digital, I don't know if it's digital detox or digital do a digital review and make sure that your investment accounts all have dual authentication. Mm-hmm. Make sure that your bank accounts have dual authentication. Make sure there's a area where your passwords are somewhere safe, and whether it's in an app or someplace in the house, that if something happens to you or your spouse, you can make sure that you can still get into your bank accounts.
Or somebody else can. Yeah.
Or somebody else can. So getting some digital security and again, a lot of these are just getting our head out of the sand, facing up that we need to get them done. You go through that 10-point checklist, you're going to have a lot less anxiety when it comes to pulling the retirement trigger.
Great. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then everyone who listens to Clark, we have a Wes Stinks, a fun Wes Stinks I'm going to read. I'm going to start with these questions.
A Wes Stinks.
Yes.
Okay.
This one's from Brian in Colorado. Some background on us. My wife and I are both 53, have been aggressive savers over the years. Our home, cars, and credit cards are paid off. We have no debt. When is it safe to call it quits and enjoy some of what we have worked so hard to save? We have 3 kids and hope to fund the cost of their undergraduate education. One child's finishing his sophomore year in college, so we have 4 + 4 + 2 = 10 years of tuition remaining to cover. With the status of the economy and the potential of ageism, should we lose our jobs? I daydream about the possibility of an early retirement. Here are their savings. Retirement savings, mostly traditional, some Roth IRAs, 401ks, and an HSA, $2.7 million. Taxable investment accounts, a mix of index funds and dividend-producing large cap stocks, $1.4 million. Cash, CDs, money markets, $1.1 million. We are slowly feeding this into the market, maybe $50,000 a year, but it never seems like the right time for a big purchase. 529 savings, $400K. As a follow-up question, when does it make sense to have a professional manage our accounts? I hate to pay someone $50K per year, 1% of $5 million, only to be disappointed when they can't outperform an S&P 500 index fund.
Okay. It seems like this is Brian in Colorado. I think it seems like education is paid for the most part. I mean, 10 years is a lot to pay for still, but $400,000 already in a 529 plan, that should cover most of it, unless they're all going to expensive private schools. And it sounds like, and that's a really good point here, is that maybe I should put it on the retirement checklist. It should say, get your kids through college first. Mm-hmm. Now, most folks are already done with that, but when you're a really early retiree, you maybe have a crossover with kids in school. It is, I would say that is a really, it's something that it should be on. If I did an early retiree checklist, this would be on it, meaning the kids' school needs to be done, because it's a little bit like a housing project. You never know how much the year or multiple years will cost, and maybe the kids go an extra year and they say, I still need more money for school. So you want to get them done and independent before you're gonna the daydream, which I love to hear about this, comes to reality. So that's one, I'd check that off the list. It sounds like it's mostly ready to be paid for. Number 2, I mean, the assets add up to, 271411, they add up to a little over $5 million. 4% rule means that you could spend $200,000. You could spend $200,000 right out of the gate forever, and then increase that by inflation. Let me make sure I'm doing my math right here. So 5 million times, let's call it
And you're talking about
my iPhone wanted to do an update while we're sitting
That's okay.
here. While we're sitting here doing the show, I said we can do the iPhone update later.
When you say the amount you can pull out, you mean gross, right?
Right. So 4% of 5.1 is $204,000 a year. That's the gross amount that you could be withdrawing from your investment account. If you're an early retiree, the income streams aren't going to kick in yet. So you're not going to be getting Social Security if you retire in your mid to late 50s. If you have a pension, that probably won't be kicking in. So it really is withdraw from the portfolio. But if that still covers the bills, the net amount after that 200, I think you're in completely fine shape. So I think that retirement is absolutely possible. There's two other quick questions. One, I'll just address the financial advisor part of this. First of all, when you have that much in assets, 5 million level, you're usually not paying 1%. And meaning that you're usually in the 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. Again, this totally depends on who you're working with, but it's still significant. 0.7 on 500 million is 35,000 a year. Absolutely. You're not paying an advisor. We all, as you're watching this, you're not paying a financial advisor ever to beat the S&P 500. That is not a thing. And I say that because if you want to beat the S&P 500 or any index, that's when you're either doing this on your own or you're looking at a hedge fund or a mutual fund. You're looking at an asset manager. And still most of the time that doesn't necessarily happen either unless you're taking a whole lot of risk. You're paying an advisor to make sure that all of those things you would like to go right over time, in fact, go as planned. And there's a lot to that. It's not just about beating the market. And if you're worried about that, then you should probably just be a pure index fund investor and just get the market return and deal with the volatility that comes along with that. And that's not necessarily a bad plan either. But an advisor is going to make sure all those different areas like estate planning, asset protection, withdrawal strategy, allocation that you can live with in retirement. Because when you get into retirement, investing gets scarier. It's just the reality. Again, more recent research I've looked at. Number one worry, even above health, Krista. Now it's almost tied, but statistically it's a little. The number one concern in retirement is your finances and dealing with an uncontrollable situation like the economy going bad. An advisor's there to get you through that, and that's whatever that should be a manageable to small percentage can really pay dividends over time. Otherwise, you can just find a fund or two or a hedge fund that is trying to, in fact, beat the market. That's, in my opinion, usually not a great strategy. And then lastly, I think he asked about dollar cost averaging in. It is a lot to put $1 million+ to work. We're in an interesting interest rate environment where rates are not low at this point, so that's good for bond investors today in this kind of environment we're in. But investing a tiny bit of that to take a couple of years, I think if you're going to get invested in a balanced plan, you want to do a 6 to 9 month wade-in strategy as opposed to a multi-year way to do it.
Okay. David in Massachusetts says, years ago, a financial pundit on TV talked about the power of compounding savings for retirement. At the time, I only had a checking and savings account, so I opened a self-directed brokerage and started putting $1,000 a month into it. I subscribed to a newsletter that followed a Buffett-style approach: buy solid companies, hold long-term, avoid day trading. I'd invest in their monthly picks and only sell when they said to. 20 years later, I've built over $2 million. With the stock market feeling turbulent, I've been thinking about the future, specifically retirement. I'm considering moving some money from aggressive stocks into something more stable, so in about 5 years, when I retire, I won't be exposed to extreme swings. But I'm worried I'll be hit hard by capital gains taxes when I sell. Is there a smart way to shift from aggressive to conservative without a big tax hit? Would it make sense to sell from my regular brokerage and reinvest in a Roth? Since Roths are taxed up front, would I be taxed twice, once when selling, again when funding the Roth? Should I just leave it alone or sell what I need later? I've heard selling in a down market near retirement can hurt with no time to recoup losses, but won't leaving it in tempt fate?
Yeah, look, David, this goes back to our last question. You may be an aggressive investor from 30 to 60, but when you get in retirement, you're worried about big swings in your retirement accounts. So you want to have some sort of balance there. There's two ways to look at this. One, we pull out our gain loss tab. Now, if you've been investing and been buy and hold mostly for 20 years, you may not have any losses, maybe no losses at that point. But you certainly have, you'll have a few big winners. That's the way the market works. That's just the way that when you're diversified and you're investing, you're going to have a couple winners that really kind of carry the day, and you're going to have some that have been a little more lackluster. So you would start with anything that's either flat to down. You may not have that. You would potentially reduce your lower winners is one way to start doing that. And you do that slowly over time. So you're keeping your capital gains at a level where you may pay zero taxes, right? Certain income brackets, long-term capital gains are taxed at zero. So that's one strategy to start chipping away. And then what you're able to sell, even if it's at a gain, if you're in the right tax bracket, it could be minimal. It could be no to minimal long-term capital gains. And then you reinvest that in more safety assets. That's the way to do it. The other way to think about this would be almost reverse dollar cost averaging, meaning that you do a schedule over time so this avoids really high peaks in the market and troughs in the market. You make a plan to say, look, I really want 20 or 30% of this to go to more conservative assets. So do a little bit every month. It's but you're selling here. So this is like reverse dollar cost averaging. Sell 1 or 2% in any given month, and that will help ride out the market swings and give you the capital to reinvest in some of these more safety-oriented areas. Now, the Roth idea, it's almost really Roth is about this. It wouldn't be a Roth conversion because it's not coming from an IRA and putting it into a Roth. So we're not talking about conversions here. You're really just talking about Roth contributions, and you can only do if you're 50 plus, it's only $8,000 in any given year. And that would just go back to if you have earned income. If you have earned income of that much or more, you can make the contribution, but you're not going to want to say that the money from my brokerage is then going to go into a Roth. That's more of a IRA to Roth conversion, but not in this situation.
Okay, now the Wes Stinks, which these are just fun. On a recent Ask an Advisor,
fun?
Yes.
Actually, I've seen some Clark's. Some of them are kind of brutal.
Well, he doesn't think so.
He doesn't think so?
Loves it. Wes called himself an apple connoisseur after stating
this
that
is about apples.
crisp pink apple is the best apple. He must not have tried the Sweet Tango, pronounced Sweet Tango apple, available from mid-fall to early winter. It's the best apple on the planet. According to applerankings.com, my own taste buds, the Sweet Tango apple is the holy grail of apples, perfect in almost any way, scoring a 97 out of 100. The crisp pink apple scores a 42 out of 100 and is likened to horse food, according to Apple Rankings. And that's from Mike in Denver. And also, Kevin wrote in to say you were incorrect with your apple choice. The Snapdragons from Aldi are the best.
Oh, I don't. Kevin is not totally wrong. Kevin is not totally wrong. There is a Snapdragon apple, and I get these at Whole Foods, and they're in a
Oh boy!
No. I'm sorry.
Clark.
Fresh Market is where I
Still,
found them. They're expensive.
Clark's somewhere screaming
Oh,
right
no!
now. Aldi.
But there is nothing like the Snapdragon apple because they're small. They're almost like the apples we would pick off in the hometown orchard that you would feed to a horse. Like a horse would eat one of these in one bite. They're little. They're like for lunch boxes, but they're super snappy. They have a great name, Snapdragon. And they're juicy, snappy. They last a long time, and the Snapdragon is really good. I'd rank it just under the crisp pink. Now the Sweet Tango is first of all, there's no way that I don't know what ridiculous website you're going to that would call a crisp pink a 42 out of 100 and be like a horse food. This is the one apple you don't feed to a horse because it's so great. Horses don't get the nuances between all these different apples. They're fine with like an old Granny Smith. You don't need to feed them a pink crisp or a Sweet Tango. I'm not saying the Sweet Tango is bad. It's a pretty good apple. The problem I have with it, I like the russeting. Like it has some russeting, which are like that little quirky thing. It's like the little barky thing that gets raised on the skin of an apple kind of makes it a little more rustic.
I had no idea
There's no russeting on the
complexity
pink crisp.
to apples.
You dig into a Sweet Tango, and it can be a little yellowy and a little ivory oriented, and I don't like that. And they don't sit and last as well. You may like them, and this is a preference thing. So I'm not going to disagree that the Sweet Tango is good. I'm just saying that the crisp pink, a good one, is the best apple. It's a 99 on my scale out of 100, and it still beats the Sweet Tango. I would just you're on the wrong website. Anybody that calls pink crisp horse food is just that's I think that is I think
offensive?
That's heretical.
Okay. Wow.
That is blasphemy. That's
Wow.
the word I'm looking for. That would be apple blasphemy.
Apple blasphemy. Well, if you're still with us, we're going to get back to it coming up straight ahead, and we're going to talk about structuring what you spend in retirement.
Welcome back to Ask an Advisor on the Clark Howard Show. Wes Moss along with Krista DiBiase. Hello.
Hello.
What do we got? So I'm going right in. What are we talking about right now?
Aren't you talking about how to spend in retirement?
Spending in retirement. This came up, and here's why. One, I think you guys wanted me to talk about it, and two, I was doing a radio show a week ago, and one of the producers who's on the air is in his early 30s. And he goes, Wes, when you get to retirement, how do you actually take the money? Is it able to do I take it right from a 401k, or do I have to put the money in another account in order to spend it? Because if you hadn't really thought about this, it is a question. It's not like your retirement accounts are not checking accounts. You don't just write checks out of them. So where does it go? How does it work? So that's the first question. The second question is, it's not as simple as I'm going to pull money out and just pay the tax and go. There's a lot of strategy behind this, and it's incredibly important of how you use the three main buckets. And the buckets are individual or brokerage account, which could be savings account or taxable account. I call them an after-tax account. Number two is any retirement account, 403B, 401k, 457, 401k, obviously, and an IRA, or individual retirement account. And then the third bucket is a Roth. And how you use those three really matters in managing your overall tax bracket. And the key, what we want to do is be able to keep and manage our tax bracket most efficiently for as long as we can when we get into retirement. And it all matters on which one of these buckets you tap first. So number one, we've got to get to the right age. So really, for most retirement plans, it's 59 and a half. That's the age when you can tap an IRA without paying a 10% penalty. Now, there's the rule of 55, which is if you retire from a job and you leave money in your 401k, you can start tapping without penalty at 55 plus. But for the most part, just first of all, know the age you're able to tap these accounts. Again, mostly it's 59 and a half. For some folks, it could be 55. Secondly, we need to recognize the three buckets. Third, let's start with a simple example. If you only have retirement accounts and you've been an amazing saver and you've got $1 million saved in a 401k plus an IRA, and you have $50,000 in an after-tax savings account, you still have plenty of money, but you really don't have many decisions to make. It's got to pretty much, you don't want to spend what I call it the most sacred bucket, which would be an after-tax account or a Roth. But that money you can typically pull out in a very tax efficient way. A Roth, of course, it's going to be tax free as long as you let it bake as long as it needs to. A savings account that's just in cash, again, you're typically not going to have any sort of capital gains to use that. A brokerage account, this is where you can manage how you pull money out. But if you're only 95% of your assets are retirement money, it just is what it is. In that case, you want to judiciously pull money out. So you only want to pull out just what you need to cover your expenses. Otherwise, you're increasing your overall adjusted gross income, and as that goes up, your tax bracket goes up. So you want to do it in a really measured way if that's your only option. But most people are going to have a series of different accounts to decide on which to pull from when. And the general order, I would say, the way to think about this is after tax or retirement money or after tax or individual brokerage money first. Then IRA money goes next. And then you save the Roth for the bigger chunk expenses you would need in retirement. New roof, 20 grand. I don't want to take it out of the IRA because I'm going to have to pay taxes on that money in order to get to it. The Roth should be tax-free. So I like to use the Roth as kind of a big expense chunk buffer in retirement. But that would be the order. Logistically, and this goes back to the 33-year-old's question, like, well, how does it really work? When you pull money from an IRA, it's typically going to go, if you're going to spend it, it's typically going to go to your checking account where you actually spend money from. But to get it there, there's a process which you've got to fill out IRA distribution forms, and you're going to have to elect your tax withholding. So there's a federal number and there's a state number. Now, you don't have to withhold taxes on IRAs. IRA withdrawals, but most people like to keep if you know you're in the 20% tax bracket and you're pulling money from an IRA, people will typically like to just withhold the 20%. That 20% sliver actually goes to the IRS, and then you get the net. Actually, and then let's say you're withholding. Now, if you're in Florida, you're not withholding for state, but if you're in a state with state income tax, let's call it 5%, then you're typically withholding 5% that goes to the state. So when it comes to what you receive in your bank account from a retirement plan distribution, it's typically net of the federal and the state withholding that you get to choose. If you're only in the 10% bracket, you would typically elect to be 10. If you don't do that, then at the end of the year, everything you pulled out will be towards your AGI, and you're going to have to pay taxes on it anyway. Now, if I looked at two different scenarios, let's say Sandy is from Oklahoma, and she has $300,000 in an IRA, $300,000 in brokerage, and $150K in Roth. She got $950 grand, $750,000. Sandy could say, let's say she gets 30 in Social Security and she needs 70 to live, or she gets 40 in social and 70 to live. So she needs to take out $30,000 a year. She could elect to just take it all day one from the retirement account. And now her income is going to be the Social Security and all of the dividends and interest that she's getting already in the regular after-tax account, because that's I'd say a current pay-by-the-day account. Anything that happens in a brokerage account, any transaction, a dividend, interest, the sale, a capital gain or a capital loss, that's owed. The taxes on those transactions are owed in that given year. So by not electing to use any of that money, she's still having to pay some tax there. And she's paying tax on the whole $30,000 that she pulled out of the IRA. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a tax bomb situation where you're paying as much as you really would need to pay. Conversely, Sandy could say, well, I've got this $300,000 in brokerage. I've got $100,000 of the $3 is in fixed income or bonds, and it's mostly just paying me interest, and it hasn't really appreciated. So she could elect to use that part, and she's really just returning her own principal. So there may not be any capital gain there at that point. So she can pull money from that account with no capital gains potentially, and not increase her income and not take anything from the IRA. So she keeps her overall adjusted gross income really low, which keeps her other tax rates low when it comes to the interest that she has to pay, and the dividend tax rates are also income-based. So it makes the whole process more efficient. Two scenarios: one, not strategically thought out and higher tax; one, strategically taking from the areas that keep and manage your tax bracket as low as possible. And that creates a big net difference to Sandy. So that's the way I'd look at it. Generally, individual account first, then IRA or 401k, then Roth for special occasions.
Roth last. Well, not necessarily, but like you said, that makes sense. That's interesting. I never would have thought of all that. All right, we'll go to questions.
Okay.
We've got this one from Joe in Florida. We are 71, have about $500,000 saved in an IRA and traditional investment accounts. We have sufficient income from guaranteed sources to cover expenses and have about 6 months additional in a high-yield savings account. We look to our investments for additional income for play money and are unconcerned about leaving money behind. With that,
that's an important
that is
piece
important.
of the equation, right?
We choose to invest in dividend stocks and ETFs, plus different high-yield bond funds. We withdraw 75% of earnings monthly, with 20% of that sent to the IRS and the remaining 25% reinvested. With this strategy, we are easily able to average an extra $2,500 per month net of tax withholding. We've had a financial advisor tell us that we are being very foolish, that we would do better going into with an immediate annuity plus direct investment in the S&P and NASDAQ. He claims our strategy is unsustainable, even though it has worked just fine for a number of years now. What are your thoughts on this strategy for someone in our age group and situation? Never heard of one like this before.
Yeah, unsustainable. The advisor's saying there's something wrong with this. Mm-hmm. So let's just think of Joe. The math here is important, and on the surface, it sounds like this has been working. Mm-hmm. So he's been pulling this money out, and his accounts still haven't gone down. So it's been working. So what's the problem, advisor? Well, let's do the math. 2,500 times 12 is 30,000. 30K divided by 500 is what, Krista?
I don't know.
6%. It's a 6% withdrawal rate. That's a little high. But those are the wrong numbers. Those are the wrong numbers to use. Because what's happening here, and this is I think what your advisor is looking at, is that $2,500 is the net amount he's getting, but he's withholding 20%. So really what you've got to look at is 2,500 divided by, adjust for taxes, it's really about $31.25 a month times 12 is $37.5 divided by 500, Joe. It's 7.5%. That's why your advisor is saying that's why he's saying I would think I don't know this guy, mm-hmm. but I think what he's probably saying is 7.5% is almost double the 4% withdrawal rate. Mm-hmm. That's the quote safe rate. And even though you're only receiving $2,500, it really is the gross number that's going out. It's that plus the taxes that are getting paid.
But then they're reinvesting the 25% remaining. Does that make a difference?
That shouldn't make a difference because he's actually not pulling from the account. So it's really just what is coming out, what is depleting the account. Now here's the other thought, is that in a lot of if you go through a stretch of markets, it's pretty good.
Right, which it has been.
That could easily work. You could pull 7.5% out and you still have more because you're making 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. The 4% withdrawal rule is based on a long market cycle where you know that you will inevitably go through lower periods of rate of return. So it's trying to protect you when things don't go well in markets. The other thought is that you have, again, I don't know the dividend stocks here, but again, it's hard to argue with dividend stocks. I'm a big believer in that. But also if you have high yield bonds or closed-end funds and they're a really big part of the overall allocation, they may pay out 8 or 9%. The problem with that typically is that there is usually a principal loss because sometimes those distributions are reducing the value of the fund. If you have a $10 fund and it pays you $1, it's a 10% yield. Hey, sounds great. But it's really not great if at the end of the year the fund is at $9. Mm-hmm. It's essentially it's giving you your own money back. And that also could be happening here. I think that's probably the disconnect here, Joe. So what would we do? What would you do here? I don't know if an immediate annuity. If you do an immediate annuity, you may get you're going to get a higher rate here than what your dividends will pay, but you lose the control of your money. You're essentially saying, look, here's my money, pay me forever until I die, and/or my spouse. So it might give you a higher overall sustainable income, but there's really not that it's not so much that there's nothing left at the end because that sounds like that's fine in your situation, Joe, but you do lose the control of being able to get to the money to go pay for a new roof if you need it. So I like keeping the liquidity and maybe just adjusting. You did say it was play money, so it doesn't seem like you have to pull out that much. So maybe you just reduce your withdrawal rate a little bit and get it closer to that 4.5% range. A little compromise here, I think, makes everybody happy.
All right. Akshay in North Carolina says, would you please talk about tax-exempt bond funds such as VTEAX, VWAHX, or bond ETFs such as VTEB? When should I invest in tax-exempt instruments like these? How can one include these types of funds in their investment strategy, and are there any risks we should be aware of?
There's always risks, Akshay. There's always risks. You're looking at tax-free bonds in general. You're talking about municipal bonds. These are obligations not to the U.S. government but to a local government or a state. So they're pretty darn high credit. Now you look at some states that have bad credit or underwater, and those municipal bonds will typically be rated pretty low. So it's just you can get a AAA rated municipal bond, or you can have an A rated, or you can have a B rated. So the credit of the municipality or the state, as that goes down, so does the rating. And you've got to be careful if you're in low rated, also higher yielding municipal bonds that are tax free at the federal level. But if you live in that same state and the bond is from that state, it's typically tax free in the state as well. So I would say that the risks are like any other bond risk. You got to worry about the credit. Assuming you stick with really high quality municipal bonds, then it's hard to say they're the same credit level as the U.S. government, but they're pretty close. A highly rated, let's call it state AAA rated bond that's a really high credit rating. But because they have a high credit rating and because they're tax free, the yields are lower. So the real math here, the calculus is looking at the tax equivalent yield. So if I get 3.5% from a tax-free bond, okay, well that's lower than I could get, let's say, in a taxable bond, but I don't have to pay taxes on it. So you have to take the tax-free yield and adjust it and make it a tax equivalent yield. So if you're in the 70% tax rate, I take the 3.5% divided by 0.7. A 3.5% tax-free bond is equivalent to a 5% taxable bond. Mm-hmm. So that's the calculus you want to do here, is that if you net, in the end, something similar, maybe a little bit more, and keep your credit rating similar to what there would be in a corporate bond environment, then I'm all for investing in municipal bonds, and this would be outside of a retirement account.
Okay. Kevin in Illinois says, I'm 57 and have been contributing to our company's 401k and have about $90,000. Our company now offers a Roth option, and I've changed contributions to be half traditional and half Roth. I intend to work until 70 if I can. Should I go all Roth, traditional, or continue the mix?
Here's my rule of thumb on that, is that high tax bracket, stick with traditional. Low tax bracket, do Roth. If you're somewhere in the middle, continue to do both. And meaning that if you're in the 30+% tax bracket, you're probably going to want to stick with the regular good old-fashioned 401k contributions. If you're 15%, let's say, and under, go with a Roth. Make your contributions to the Roth 401k. A lot of people are in that middle ground, and I think it's a really smart way to do it, Kevin, is if you're in that middle tax range, split them 50-50 so that you have both.
Awesome. All right. Well, that does it for this episode of Ask an Advisor. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Hope you'll stick with us. And tomorrow, Clark will be back. Have a great rest of your day.